Well, good morning, everyone. It's Saturday, January 17th, 2026, and Happy New Year to everyone. We welcome you to the French Canadian Heritage Society of Michigan's monthly membership meeting, which is being recorded. A quick couple announcements before we get on with our presentation today. I would like to, those that are not members, please consider becoming a member to show your support to our programming. Our monthly meeting schedules are published on our website, habitatheritage.org, and on our Facebook page. So if you're not a member of our Facebook page, please consider doing so. All of our announcements go through there as well. Our memberships get notification of all the advanced memos, so please consider becoming a member. The membership form is located and easy to access on our website. If you have any questions, please send a message to information@habitatheritage.org. Please stay muted during the presentation. Questions are welcome and encouraged, so please type them in the chat, and our presenter will get to your questions either probably at the end of the presentation. I'm excited to introduce our society's author, Gail Moreau-Dinahay, to tell you about her most recent books. Gail?
Okay. Our first books came out in 2016 with Suzanne and Diane, who are no longer with us. They have both died. And then in 2023, we did our next set of books of 1711 to 1720. And then this past year, I was able to do the burials of St. Anne in Detroit from 1706 to 1805. And then I was able in the fall of this year to do the book that accompanies it, which would be the burials from Assumption, Windsor from 1768 to 1805. And you actually need both books to get both sides of the river because the people went back and forth quite a bit before a number of the people actually settled in Monroe, Michigan, and some actually went further south. But the books are complete with who they married, children if they had, if they were married and had children, if they were descendants. Also, there are some baptisms from France if those have been found. And you can find the information on our society's website.
Thank you, Gail. Now I'd like to hand you off to our program coordinator, Charlie Bird. Charlie, thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Bonjour. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, the curator of manuscripts at the William Clements Library in Ann Arbor, Mr. Cheney Schopieray. Cheney is a graduate of the University of Michigan with a bachelor's degree in philosophy and a master's degree in information science, with a specialization in archives and records management. Cheney has worked in the manuscripts division of the William Clements Library for 23 years, first as a student, then assistant curator, and now curator. He manages and performs various operations within the division, such as collection development, grant writing and oversight of grant projects, reader assistance, instruction, exhibitions, writing projects, and digital projects. We are fortunate that he also makes presentations such as he will for us today. His particular areas of interest are the material culture of manuscripts, the provenance and movement of papers over time, the age of revolutions, and more. Today, Cheney will briefly introduce us to the Clement Library's wide range of handwritten collections pertinent to French Canadian history. Then he will share and explore with us the recently digitized Thomas Gage papers and the Great Britain Indian Department collection. On behalf of the French Canadian Heritage Society, let me introduce you to Cheney Schopieray. Good morning, Cheney.
Good morning, Charlie, and thank you very much to you and to everyone who's joined today. I pleased to be here. For those of you who don't know, the William L. Clements Library is on the campus of the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and we collect primary source materials pertinent to the study of the early Americas, very broadly defined. So, in practical terms, we collect roughly from the late 15th century all the way up until the period of around the Second World War, although the bulk of our collections really fall between the 17 teens and around 1900. We have particular strengths in printed materials on the period of European exploration and discovery. We have manuscript materials. We're most particularly known for our handwritten tens of thousands of letters and documents, diaries, journals, grocery lists, and so on, pertinent to the American Revolutionary War. But our materials are much, much broader than that, covering children's letters to Santa Claus, to a variety of anything you can think of that might pertain to American history and culture, whether it's education or law and jurisprudence, crime and punishment, politics and government, Native American history, certainly throughout, women's history, and so on and so forth. It's an absolutely extraordinary collection, and if you have an opportunity to be in Southeast Michigan, we would encourage you to stop by. Letting us know in advance would allow for us to provide better service to you. But it is an absolutely spectacular collection that, being in what its founder, William Clements, was questioned in 1920 whether he thought it really was the best idea to establish his library in the wilderness of Ann Arbor. So, but the collection is international in its scope, though its focus is early Americana. Today, we'll talk a little bit about some of the materials we have pertinent to French colonial America, very briefly, and then talk much more about the digital collections that we are working on and have available or partially available in the Thomas Gage and Great Britain Indian Department collections. And I'm delighted to be here in front of this group in particular because the I always find that in heritage societies there's a much greater awareness of the paperwork needed to track down minutia, and that's very much something we'll talk about today. So the Clements Library has family collections, papers, letters, documents, and so on pertinent to French Detroit, families who had settled there, areas around what's now Monroe, Michigan, and Frenchtown. We have extraordinary materials pertinent to any sort of conflict that's happening between the British and French powers in North America from the 1740s up and through the early 19th century. So, for example, we have one of the four original Benjamin West paintings of the death of General Wolfe on the Plains of Abraham, and we have the engraved prints of the death of Montcalm from the same conflict. We have eyewitness accounts of the conflicts of that particular conflict from the river below Quebec. And we have receipts and accounts that represent the contracted labor of everyday people who are moving wood, chopping trees, washing clothes, and engaging in everyday life during these periods in the 1750s and 60s. And we'll look at some of those today. So I'm going to start with Thomas Gage, not a Frenchman, but a man out of Sussex. His family estates in Sussex in England. He was a career military officer. I've listed here a series of his ever-increasing responsibilities from the War of Austrian Succession all the way up through his role as Commander-in-Chief for the British Army in North America from the end of the French and Indian War up until the outbreak of the American Revolution, and then his post-America career in the Light Dragoons overseas. Now, one of the things, one of the aspects of Gage's career is that he's very much an administrator as a man. He's far less capable as a field commander, but he was an effective administrator. So, as military governor at Montreal during the Seven Years' War, French and Indian War, and as commander-in-chief of the British Army, his headquarters papers were maintained impeccably. They are an extraordinary volume of, it's somewhere upwards of 23,100 letters and documents and journals and diaries and accounts and so on. And that's what we'll look at today. I'll show some examples. To think about Gage's papers, I find it most useful to think about the geography of Gage's world in the Americas. So, of the couple of dozen colonies, here we see the mainland American colonies. If you look closely, you'll see small rectangles representing military regiments. So you can imagine as commander-in-chief, you've got a widely dispersed army that you need to continue to communicate with. The reports, accounts, contracting, people need to get paid. All of that paperwork needs to flow to and from Gage's headquarters at New York. And I'm pretty sure you can see my mouse here. So you've got New York here, you've got Quebec, you've got Montreal, you've got Montreal, you've got your Detroit and Michilimackinac and so on. This map, incidentally, is from the papers of William Petty, the second Earl of Shelburne. Shelburne is perhaps most known as the prime minister who negotiated peace at the end of the American Revolution. His working papers are at the Clements Library, which is a rather extraordinary circumstance. It's as if you can try and imagine a U.S. president's papers being in Germany, for example, and you can imagine the sort of unusual nature of having a prime minister's papers overseas, and we can talk about why that is later. But at this time, in 1766-67, Shelburne was the Secretary of State for the Southern Department, and that included the colonies. And so, as they're making decisions over in London, this map would have served Shelburne well in his decision-making processes. I zoom in a little bit closer so you can see better Quebec. These regiments represent. I don't have the precise numbers of each of these in actuality, but they typically were just under about 500 men that are being that are located and garrisoned at these different posts. Yet Three Rivers and Montreal, Niagara, Detroit, etc. So the Gage papers themselves include a variety of different what are called series. We have an English series that represent his correspondence overseas from the Americas to largely to Whitehall and London, the people who were making large level decisions that affected the military and governance. The American series, which is all of his correspondence and documents that are internal to North America. His letters and account books, which are extensive. The warrants being part of those accounts are a full 40 volumes alone. And then some of his family papers. Peter Warren was his uncle and involved in military activity earlier in Louisburg area, so also pertinent to conflicts between the English and the French. Amherst, his predecessor as commander-in-chief of the British Army in North America, and another family member, Skinner. This is an incredible volume of materials. As I mentioned, it's about 23,100 letters, diaries, documents, and so on. They were, in the 1940s, put into these large red volumes. They were tipped in, as they call it. Each page of these large red volumes had a handwritten letter or document that was essentially taped to that heavy stock page. And in order to do the digitization work, they all had to be removed from those. So you can imagine this took quite some time. You can see here our conservator was at work removing these letters and documents from the large volumes. This resource, the volume of paper, the nature of the position of commander-in-chief is highly significant. He's not only a military commander, but try and think of him as he's the highest level administrator in the American colonies. So not only is he involved in everyday activity of the military, the promotions, the replacements, the movements of troops, and all the details related to logistics of handling a massive army, but also he is corresponding regularly with governors, colonial governors who were of a lower stature than he in the administrative hierarchy. And we'll see examples too where what that means is he's also receiving minor complaints from and petitions from everyday individuals. Back in 2021, we received a grant to help us in the process of digitizing the Gage papers. The National Endowment for the Humanities provided a large portion of the funds necessary to do so, and we are grateful to them for it. The actual process of digitizing the Gage papers was slow and steady. At 600 DPI, we scanned every single page of the Gage papers, including blank pages, so that we could produce as well as possible the experience of interacting with the papers online as you might in the reading room, and in some ways have better access to some of the larger documents. We then would have them available in a display like the one on the right, and we'll see that closer in a bit. This is a slightly later edition. Our head of digital projects, Amiko Hastings, and I have been working diligently for quite some time on trying to find effective ways to produce transcriptions of these materials. We know people want to search for keywords within handwritten materials. There are a variety of different ways that people have used to approach that problem. Some of them are proprietary, some of them are open source or free if you have the technical expertise to run them. In the case of the Gage papers, because so many of them were produced with the same beautiful English roundhand, and because the volume was so much, we aimed to try to create an artificial intelligence model to read the letters. And this is some of the basic data about that process. We worked with a consortium, or it's a cooperative of universities overseas and here in the States, based at the Universität of Innsbruck, and using a product they called Transcribus, which is very effective for its ability to read a variety of different time periods of writing. It also involved us proofreading the results of different passes through the artificial intelligence to basically train it to read. And the results are currently at 2.38% character error rate. Now that sounds extraordinary, but character error rate means that a certain portion of a small portion of the characters are off. That could be in just as many words. So that has an effect on searchability. The original spelling of the letters of the words has an effect on searchability, and we're still working through some of those issues. But our goal is to eventually have, a usable search tool for the text of the Gage papers. And I'd be happy to talk more about different avenues that we could have used or that we've tried to use previously, um, and what we're doing now and experimenting with a different tool currently. The results are a web page of the digitized Thomas Gage papers. We continue to add to it. Although the papers have been digitized, there's a variety of metadata that we're producing about each of the pieces, that is, identifying writer or writers, recipients, type of document, what the dates are, and trying to cluster them in the meaningful ways that reflect that. For example, if the series are arranged largely chronologically, but Gage and his and the people he was corresponding with frequently enclosed many additional documents with the letters that they were sending, and those might predate, the actual letter by years. So if you were to look chronologically through, you might see March 5th, 1767, and then it might be followed by 5 dates that precede that initial correspondence date, because those are the dates of the earlier enclosures, and trying to represent that in a meaningful way in a digitized environment. It's very obvious when you're looking at it physically, right? Like you can see, here's this letter and here's the 5 enclosures that were with it. But in a digital environment, you look at one letter and then you look at another letter, and it takes a little bit of a little extra effort to make those connections. And we wanted to make that as easy as possible for the users. This is an example of one of the pages from the digitized Gage papers. You can see this is the right is the result of the artificially intelligence produced transcription. You'll see as you read it, there's an interesting mixture of words that might be misspelled because the original writer misspelled them, or they might be misspelled because the AI wasn't able to read it well. It's not perfect, which is why at the top of every transcription it says, "Why are there errors in this transcription?" So that it's very clear that we're not imagining that this is a completely flawless exercise. But to actually get into the papers, then, we'll take a look at just a few examples that represent, I think, some of the types of materials pertinent to French America and English relations with the French in these, especially these border cities of Quebec and Montreal and Detroit and Michilimackinac. This is a deposition that was written and given to Thomas Gage while he was governor at Montreal, and it concerns an everyday circumstance where a woman had been accused of a particular crime, in this case against her child, and it is a deposition stating that she's not guilty of this. And one of the things that these depositions can provide is they need to identify the person that the deposition is about. And so we have here, it's indicating that this is Marguerite Joubert, who's the daughter of Pierre and Marie Agatha. It looks like Garachon, and we can start to unravel these family relationships through these petitions and depositions that Gage is receiving as the governor at Montreal. And we've also tried, and if we were to go, as you can see in the bottom citation here. As we've been digitizing these, we've been making our very best effort to identify the signatories and the names of the individuals who are writing and receiving all of these materials, because we recognize that it is a challenge to try and unravel some of the signatures and who these individuals are. And hopefully that will also help researchers like yourselves be able to more quickly work through the meanings of the documents and the people and relationships within them. This is another example of one of those petitions. This one is from a group of Franciscan Récollets who are beseeching Gage's assistance in making sure that the three towns in Quebec are adequately protected during. I'm not exactly sure what what the it doesn't say in the document itself, but exactly what the circumstances that led to this. I'm not 100% sure. You can see it definitely was before 1764. We just don't have the context within the Gage papers to unravel it. So we can look to secondary source materials, and hopefully somebody's done a study of it. If not, it's an open avenue for research, and we would look forward to seeing what someone did with it. Other types of documents that show up in the Gage papers. When you think of military papers, one of the things that certainly I get excited about when, for my own family history's sake, is muster rolls, right? Military papers often have returns and muster rolls giving lists of troops and where they are at particular places, what their ranks are, sometimes even whether they're traveling with their spouse, and so on. Well, unfortunately, the Gage papers do not have almost any muster rolls. They do have some, but they're usually in companion with some other issue that's happening at the time, not part of the regular routine submission of muster rolls. But what they do have are lists of various kinds that pertain to some implementation of legislation or acts that happen overseas. So, for example, here is this list of inhabited lands in the north and south sides of the Detroit River in 1760. This document was not produced in 1760. It's a copy of one. The reason that it was copied is because in 1768, one sort of on the horizon is this significant change with the distribution of troops because of unrest happening in urban areas on the eastern coast, right? The Stamp Act and so on. British troops are being consolidated more at these urban areas, and they're being removed from any except for key posts like Detroit. And to move troops to the east and then consolidate troops into these into forts that weren't necessarily all set to accommodate them. They have to do things like, in this case, build barracks. To build barracks, they need land. And so this is all lists of largely French landowners whose property is essentially being seized by the British government for use for the creation of barracks during this time period. I'm just going to flip back to the other. And we can see some of these names, like if we look back at this piece that was also enclosed in the same letter, we can see that Beaulieu here, with his 3 acres of land, excuse me, also appears right here with his same 3 acres of land in 1768 as they're going through the process of seeing what land is available for them to acquire and for the purposes of of barracks building. Not all of this is just lists of property owners. These aren't all people who had all of their lands, acquired by the British. I may have may have sounded like, or I may have spoken a little too broadly. There are documents that indicate which men and women had, or which men had their properties actually used for that purpose. Um, but lists like these exist in the papers where it's not necessarily something you would go looking for as a uniform document that's created regularly, but certainly it provides meaningful information for people looking for those everyday folks who are living their lives. And in this case, you can also see which men, how many men and women are inhabiting each of these properties. Right. So that is a whirlwind of the Gage papers. It is an extraordinarily large collection, but it ties very intimately in with the Great Britain Indian Department. Um, as I mentioned, the highest level administrator in the colonies is the commander-in-chief of the British Army, and uh, in the English colonies, I mean, and the Indian Department, when it's initially formed in 1755, also falls under the purvey of the commander-in-chief. So you'll find in the Gage papers significant correspondence between, the superintendents of Indian Affairs. That would be William Johnson in the Northern Department and John Stewart for the great many years in the Southern Department. But the Northern Department includes, um, the areas that the French Canadian borderlands. Um, Here I've written down the chief purposes of the department. It formed out of a need to help consolidate the relations between the British and indigenous tribes and communities. Um, and I should say that when it was born out of the Albany Congress of 1754 and was implemented the next year. Um, and we'll come back to the Albany Congress in just a moment. But um, the Great Britain Indian Department collection is a body of around 50 letters and documents and journals and minutes pertinent to the operations of the Indian Department, but it's an unusual collection in some ways. This is a collection of materials that feels very much like if William Johnson, again, the superintendent of Indian Affairs, had a file cabinet that had been largely picked over, and then what was left was dumped out. That's what the collection feels like, is um, this miscellaneous sort of group of stuff. And the reason it is like that is it's a collection that showed up at auction in 1997, and the collection was sold item by item out of by Igor, a hotel in Montreal. And the Clements Library and other institutions and individual collectors and others clamored to this hotel to acquire as much of this material as possible. It, the the group that we have largely pertains again to, here's your map. Again, you'll see the same primary locations here of on this 1766 map. You'll see Treble River, the three rivers, um, and Quebec and so on and so forth. The dot in the middle here of New York is Johnson Hall. Sort of that's rather than Thomas Gage is at New York, the city of New York, and William Johnson's main point of the departments at Johnson Hall. So in this auction, excuse me, there were all these listings of items, and my late colleague and friend Brian Dunnigan did the bidding on our behalf at this sale in '97. And because Brian, many of you might either know Brian himself or his extraordinary work on Detroit. Um, he knew who was there on behalf of other libraries because he knew people. So he jotted down, the people that acquired different lots from this that he knew. He didn't know all of them, but so you'll see, for example, abbreviations for the Burton Historical Collection, who acquired some of this material. You'll like BHC. You'll see CL for Clements Library that acquired some of this material. You'll also see some citations of where some of this had already been published in different copy form. Um, um, but we tried to acquire as much as we could that hadn't already been published. Um, and then we had to do some extensive conservation work because it was in terrible condition, and then digitized it. And we have a similar website to the Thomas Gage site that reflects the Indian Department. Um, Perhaps one of the most significant pieces that we secured was the minutes and reports of the Albany Commissioners of Indian Affairs from 53 to 55, when the decisions about this organization were being established. Unlike the Gage papers, this is a very miscellaneous pile of stuff. So you'll find Detroit, you'll find Montreal, you'll find interactions between French traders and indigenous populations throughout the collection, but it needs more evaluation to do so. Excuse me. You'll also notice on the right, you'll see it says no text available. Because of how many different hands were committed to the creation of this collection, this is it's been largely ineffective at having artificial intelligence handwriting recognition technology be able to handle it. So whether or not we decide to do a crowdsourcing transcription-a-thon for this collection, that may be in our future. We'll see. And because I'm short on time, I just wanted to introduce these two digital collections. I would like to end on this particular piece, if I can bring it up. This is one of a number of documents in the Great Britain Indian Department that pertains to establishing, maintaining, and trying to reestablish broken um, um, partnerships, friendships, tentative diplomatic ties between the British and the indigenous populations. Again, the French traders and others are a part of many of these conversations as interpreters and otherwise. Um, this is actually the live website, but it has some of the most beautiful um, beautiful language from a Shawnee chief. This is on the west side of Virginia, um, but it's one of the most beautiful pieces in the collection. But I just this material is available for use, and and it's available in its entirety. The Great Britain Indian Department. The Gage papers, as I said, have more still to come. And what I was hoping is there'd be questions, and I can talk more about the collections or specific interests in them for the remainder of the time that I have here today, either about the library, these collections, or other collections that we may have. So I'm going to stop sharing because I can't see how many people are here, but oh, there's everyone. Thank you for letting me share these couple of resources with you today. I'm looking at the chat here. There's a few questions in here that I'll answer. It says, "Is there a handout for the presentation or resources?" After this, it'll probably be tomorrow, but I'll send out both the slides as well as a sheet that has, as well as a digital sheet that has links to a variety of different resources to help navigate these collections. Um, I'm going to skip the second one because I'll talk about AI in a second. The yes, Gail, they can be accessed online, and though the sheet that I'll send will have that, will have links to those, so you can peruse at your and search at your leisure. Um, searching by surname is something that I'd very much like to have, and I think because of the technology involved. The Clements Library doesn't actually have its own IT personnel to host these products. It uses the University of Michigan's digital content and collections. So we have, and they are extraordinary partners and are consistently working um, on development of search tools, and they've been improving dramatically over the last couple of years. And we're hoping to have, not they're working on, I should say, we're hoping to have, they're working on better search ability of the collections that have been transcribed, and searching across collections as well, because we may have digital collections that pertain to surnames and persons of interest, um, or topics of interest that just may not be in these two collections, but might happen to be in another one that we've digitized. Um, so that's also on the horizon this year. And our next round of Gage papers, another 50 volumes, will go up in the next few weeks. And we'll get that project done, hopefully by the summertime. Um, let's see. Um, this question about whether AI will be an asset as it evolves is a really, how much time do you have? I the really short version is right now, I don't really know. Right now, it's an interesting sort of tool, but I also see it being used across the humanities the same, like it's like when you get a new hammer and everything starts to look like a nail, where you've got different tools at your disposal, but this thing is so shiny and is doing things that are very surprising, and have the potential to do a great deal of good. Right now, um, I'm I'm confident enough with what we've put out for the Gage papers that it's pretty clear where there are errors. The danger of artificial intelligence for handwriting recognition, we're working right now with a couple of um, we're working with Gemini Pro, which is Google's what Google uses. Um, and we're working with that in combination with Transcription Pearl to try and see what that can do for transcription. And I've seen this thing um, transcribe phonetically written letters like almost to a T, like just beautifully. And it was just utterly shocking. It had like 3 errors in it for a whole page of handwritten text that wasn't particularly easy to read. The 2 errors, one was the date, and another was in the middle of it, significantly meaningful, errors. Um, However, there are there were others where I gave it to them and it looked like it was getting it right, and then there was something that it was very hard to read, and it just made up the text and filled it in. It just hallucinated whatever it was, whatever its dictionaries and large language models fit, which is not only wrong, but it's extraordinarily dangerous because, if I have, um, a letter by Father Richard and it puts words in his mouth and people use that, that's a significant problem. So that's not a tool that we'll be able to use at this juncture, even though it's showing a great deal of promise. As I said, I even took a letter that was written by hand, mirrored, like the writer mirrored his writing, so it looked like if you held it up in a mirror, it would look accurate, which is a very skilled thing for a penman to do. This is from the 1790s. And I put it in, and it was able to transcribe it almost perfectly. Didn't even have to tell it it was mirrored. Um, so it's a real question mark on what that can do. It may be an asset as it evolves, but I am very, very skeptical as I go, always. Oh, James, thank you for that too. That reminds me. I also was experimenting with, non-Latin letters. So there's a physician, Jewish German immigrant who came over in 1832 and set up shop in Virginia and Maryland. And I, one of his Hebrew letters that he wrote in Hebrew, handwritten Hebrew, I sent, I sent to through the Google Gemini transcription Pearl, gave it to a colleague who's a scholar in Hebrew languages. He read the transcription, said, "Oh, that's great. That's really good Hebrew. It's this, this, and this." He said, "I'm going to send it to a native speaker." He sent it to a native speaker who's also a scholar, and then I got an email back there where they said, "Yeah, it's fantastic Hebrew, but I think you sent me the wrong image." It made up the whole thing. Like it recognized that it was in Hebrew, but none of it had anything to do with the manuscript itself. So yeah, um, we have very very little in the way of handwritten materials on Father Richard, Gail, but we can. That's something there's some split between the early Michigan history collections at the Bentley Library and the Clements Library. They have most of Father Richard's imprints, but I'm pretty sure I have a letter or two of his. I don't want to bend everyone's ear. If there are any questions, again, I'll send out some resources tomorrow, or I'll send the resources. Actually, I'll send it to you, Charlie, if that's all right.
Sure.
And then whatever you feel is appropriate to distribute to the group, feel free. And that'll include my contact information too.
Some of what you talked about is mind-boggling for to realize that the magnitude of the collection, to even have AI try reading it. I read a lot of old documents and I would say I don't know, but AI doesn't like to say I don't know. So reliability is sort of a big factor, and it puts it in the shade a little bit, unfortunately. But it's something to work on. Uh,
Yeah, the one that we have set up for the Gage papers, that is a different sort of it's artificial intelligence, but it's of a different sort than the Google Gemini. It does something different. It's based on large language models that are produced by people like from the ground up on handwritten materials. So, and it doesn't hallucinate or fabricate things that it doesn't know. It has errors where it doesn't know. But it's very clear what the errors are. It doesn't try and it call back to a dictionary, for example, to try and make a word that is a real word. It'll just think of what the character is and put that character in, even if it makes gibberish. So I prefer that to
mhm.
potential fabrication of stuff. Um, and we have the same challenges with um, um, crowdsourced materials. So when we first started digitizing, I was putting out calls for people to just volunteer and try and transcribe some stuff, and that was useful for a couple of collections that had easier to read handwriting. But people do that too, where like that thing that AI does, where I put out James Sterling's letter book. James Sterling was a fur trader in Detroit in the 1760s, and his handwriting's wretched, and the results of the crowdsourced transcriptions were similar, where people would like think they saw a word that they knew there, and put that word in, even if it was the wrong word. So it was a very similar sort of challenge where proofreading those transcriptions was just vital, and that takes a long time for me or my staff to try and go through. And we just have so much on our plates that we had to kind of pull the plug on crowdsourcing. But I'm not against doing that again, especially maybe for the Gage papers. They're just such an important resource, internationally speaking.
There was another question about how you can make an appointment for the Clements Library, and they asked if it could be in the material that you forward to me.
Yes, I will do that. Maureen asked a question about where those documents came from. I don't know. It isn't indicated in the auction catalog. And I asked, and of course we're always interested in where these documents, what attic they come out of, if we can, know. Um, Auction houses don't reveal their sources almost ever, in my experience. Part of that's privacy, part of it's business. Um, and the best that you can do is email them and say, please pass my information along to the person who consigned it. We would love to hear more. But if they don't respond, then it's kind of a black hole.
Each bit of information is connected to so many others. Again, I think what you folks are doing is incredible. Just to try to find the names, and you read a letter by person X, and they mention seven other people. So now you have eight names to enter into your cross-reference database. It just multiplies rapidly. That's I don't envy that task. It's Sisyphean, right? The Aegean stables.
It is, and you know, everything looks, we try and make things look as professional and competent as possible. But we are just as we make errors too, and so we value feedback, letting us know where things are broken or where things are in error, and we do our best to keep rebuilding the ship at sea, you know, keep her afloat.
Well, we're drawing near to the end of the time. Uh, Unless there's any other questions coming in right now, I will go ahead and thank you on behalf of the French Canadian Heritage Society for your time and presentation today, Cheney. It's incredible the work you folks do. I'd like to, and you are, of course, welcome to join us again anytime. Our next Zoom presentation is scheduled for Saturday, February 21st at 11 a.m., where our guest speaker will be Professor Michael Nassani as he returns for a talk on the French era architectural practices in the Great Lakes. So from me, thank you, everyone. Au revoir. I'm not sure if anyone else has something to say here, but thank you again. Incredible. I'll be in touch.
Great.
Thanks
Thank
to
you.
all, and I'd like to extend an invitation again for anybody to join our membership. Your contributions to the society help us to engage with experts in the field as you see today. Please reach out to us at any time, and I hope you enjoy today's Michigan Wonderland. I know I will. I think it's beautiful. And have a wonderful, wonderful day. And we'll see you next month or sooner. Thank you.